Buried deep within the writings of a medieval English historian lies a strangely specific report that has puzzled readers for centuries. The document describes the opening of a grave in Anglo-Saxon England more than 1,300 years ago. Inside was the body of a queen-turned-nun who had reportedly been dead for 16 years. By all normal expectations, there should have been little left except bones. But according to the account, the women who opened the tomb found something entirely different. The body was intact. So were the linen wrappings that enveloped it. The limbs could still be handled and moved. And most unsettling of all, a surgical incision made in the woman's neck shortly before her death was allegedly still visible, reduced to little more than a faint scar. The report was recorded by Bede, one of the most influential Christian monks and scholars of the early medieval world, widely regarded as the father of English history. Today, her story exists somewhere between history, medicine, religion, and legend. Because unlike many ancient miracle accounts filled with vague claims and dramatic embellishment, this report reads differently. It documents the opening of the grave itself. It names witnesses and describes a specific medical condition. And it preserves details so physical and precise that even modern historians still debate what the witnesses may actually have seen that day. So who was this mysterious saint? Why was her body exhumed in the first place? And what exactly happened when medieval nuns lifted the lid of her coffin 16 years after her burial? Long before her body became the center of one of medieval England's strangest exhumation accounts, Saint Etheldreda was born into one of the most powerful royal families in Anglo-Saxon England. She entered the world around the year 636, during a violent and unstable period when kingdoms constantly fought for land, power, and survival. England did not yet exist as a single nation. Instead, the island was divided among rival kingdoms ruled by warrior kings, shifting alliances, and fragile dynasties. Etheldreda was born into the royal house of East Anglia. Her father was King Anna, a Christian ruler remembered for raising several daughters who would later become saints. Religion and politics were deeply intertwined in this period, and royal marriages were often used to secure alliances between kingdoms. Etheldreda's future would be shaped by exactly those kinds of political arrangements. As a young woman, she was first married to a regional ruler named Tonbert. The marriage was likely political, designed to strengthen the territorial influence around the marshlands of Ely, a remote and isolated region surrounded by wetlands and waterways. But shortly after the marriage, Tonbert died. Etheldreda eventually married again, this time to one of the most powerful men in England, Ecgfrith of Northumbria. At first glance, the marriage looked like a major political victory. Northumbria was among the dominant kingdoms of the age, and Etheldreda had effectively become a queen of one of the most powerful realms in Britain. But behind the scenes, serious tensions were allegedly developing. According to historical accounts, Etheldreda had taken a vow of perpetual virginity and wished to devote herself entirely to religious life. At first, Ecgfrith reportedly tolerated the arrangement, but as years passed, pressure inside the royal court began to grow. A king without heirs faced political danger, and eventually, the marriage itself became a source of conflict. Church writers later described Ecgfrith attempting repeatedly to persuade or pressure Etheldreda to abandon her vow and remain fully as his queen. Then, according to the accounts, everything changed. Etheldreda fled the Northumbrian court. The escape would become one of the most famous moments in her story. Tradition claims she traveled south, accompanied by loyal supporters while agents of the king pursued her. At one point, she reportedly took refuge on a rocky outcrop where rising tides temporarily blocked those attempting to capture her. Whether every detail of the story is literal or not, one fact is clear. Etheldreda walked away from wealth, status, and political power at the height of her influence. In the 7th century, that was almost unthinkable. Eventually, she entered religious life formally and returned to Ely, the marshland territory connected to her first marriage. There, she founded a monastery that would become one of the great religious centers of medieval England. Over time, Ely grew into a major pilgrimage destination, and Etheldreda herself became one of the most revered female saints in English Christianity. But the event that would make her famous for more than 1,000 years had not yet happened. Because near the end of her life, the former queen developed a painful swelling in her neck, and according to one medieval physician, what happened after her death would become impossible to forget. By the final years of her life, Saint Etheldreda had become the leader of the growing religious community at Ely. The former queen now lived not in royal courts, but among the nuns in the isolated marshlands of eastern England. But then, she became seriously ill. According to accounts later preserved by Bede, Etheldreda developed a large swelling in her neck, painful enough that a physician was eventually called to treat her. The doctor's name was Cynefrith. That detail remains. Unlike many medieval miracle stories that speak only in vague spiritual language, this account introduces an identifiable medical witness who claimed to have personally treated the saint before her death. Cynefrith later described making an incision in Etheldreda's neck in an attempt to relieve the swelling. The treatment apparently brought temporary relief, but it didn't save her. Around the year 679, Etheldreda died. She had likely been in her early 40s. According to later Christian tradition, Etheldreda herself believed the painful condition in her neck was connected to the jewelry and fine clothing she had worn during her years as a queen, interpreting the illness as a kind of spiritual purification before death. After she died, her body was buried in a simple wooden coffin within the monastery grounds, and there it remained. Years passed. The monastery at Ely continued growing in importance, and devotion to Etheldreda spread throughout the region. Then, about 16 years after her burial, church officials decided to exhume her remains and transfer them into a more honorable resting place inside the monastery church. This was not entirely unusual in the early medieval church. The bodies of important religious figures were sometimes moved into shrines or stone tombs as public devotion increased around them. But no one expected what the women at Ely allegedly found when the grave was finally opened. According to Bede's account, the body inside the coffin appeared almost untouched by decay. The linen wrappings remained intact, the limbs could still be moved and handled, and the incision in her neck, the very wound Cynefrith claimed to have treated before her death, was reportedly visible only as a faint scar. For the nuns at Ely, the discovery was overwhelming. But for later historians, the account became something else entirely. One of the earliest and strangest detailed exhumation reports in medieval Christian history. The grave of Saint Etheldreda was opened sometime around the year 695, and by then she had been dead for approximately 16 years. The task of overseeing the transfer of her remains reportedly fell to the nuns of Ely, including her successor, Aethelfrith's own sister, Siexber. According to the account preserved by Bede, the women first searched for a proper stowed coffin to receive the remains. What happened next became part of the legend itself. Near the ruins of an old Roman settlement, workers reportedly discovered a white marble sarcophagus that seemed almost perfectly fitted to Etheldreda's body. Medieval Christians saw this as a sign of divine providence. But the real shock came when the wooden coffin was finally opened. Inside, the body allegedly appeared almost unchanged. Bede wrote that she looked as if she had died and been buried that very day. For medieval readers, that line alone was astonishing. But the account did not stop there. The linen cloth surrounding the body was reportedly still intact. The remains could still be lifted and transferred. And perhaps most unsettling of all, the incision made in her neck shortly before death was said to have healed, leaving behind only a faint mark. The physician Cynefrith, the same doctor who had treated her illness years earlier, was later quoted describing what he saw. According to the account, he remembered making the cut himself in an attempt to drain the swelling in her neck. But during the exhumation, he claimed the wound no longer appeared fresh or disfiguring. To medieval observers, the discovery was interpreted as miraculous evidence of her sanctity. But viewed from a modern perspective, the report becomes fascinating for another reason entirely. It is unusually physical. The account doesn't focus primarily on visions, lights, or supernatural spectacles. Instead, it describes a known medical condition, a named physician, a documented incision, the condition of cloth and flesh, and the handling of the body during transfer. That level of specificity is rare in very early medieval writings. And because the original remains were later lost during the destruction of religious shrines in England centuries afterward, historians can never re-examine the body itself. All that survives is the account. A strange report from the Dark Ages describing a dead queen whose body witnesses insisted had somehow resisted decay. After the exhumation, devotion to Saint Etheldreda exploded across medieval England. Her remains were placed inside the monastery church at Ely, where pilgrims began traveling from distant regions to visit their shrine. Over time, Ely transformed into one of the great religious centers of England. The original monastery eventually evolved into what is now Ely Cathedral, one of the most recognizable medieval cathedrals in the country. For centuries, Etheldreda's body remained at the center of local devotion. Kings, clergy, monks, and ordinary pilgrims all traveled to Ely. Medieval writers continued repeating the stories of the exhumation, preserving the details recorded by Bede generation after generation. And strangely enough, even her nickname would survive into the English language itself. At fairs held in her honor, vendors sold inexpensive lace ornaments known as St. Audrey's lace. Over time, the phrase slowly evolved into the English word tawdry, one of the greatest linguistic legacies attached to a medieval saint. But the shrine at Ely would not survive forever. In the 1500s, during the English Reformation under Henry VIII, monasteries across England were dismantled, looted, or destroyed. Shrines associated with saints were targeted, especially heavily. Etheldreda's shrine at Ely was torn apart. What happened to her remains afterwards is uncertain. Most historians believe the body was destroyed, scattered, hidden, or permanently lost to destruction. And that disappearance transformed the story into even greater mystery. Because unlike later incorrupt saints, whose bodies can still be examined today, Etheldreda's remains vanished centuries ago. There can be no modern forensic investigation, no DNA testing or scientific examination. Only the surviving medieval report remains. A strangely specific account written by one of the most respected historians of the early Middle Ages. And more than 13 centuries later, the question still remains. What exactly did the nuns at Ely see when the coffin was opened? Was the preservation natural, exaggerated, or misunderstood? Or did witnesses truly encounter something they could not explain? Whatever the answer may be, the story of St. Audrey of Ely became one of the earliest, most enduring incorruptibility accounts in Christian history. A mystery preserved not through relics, but through words. So what do you think about Queen Etheldreda or St. Audrey? Do you believe the accounts are real? Or just folklore? Be sure to leave your comment below. And if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to see more videos like this.